I am so conservative.
Rationalize in my head. These are things I read.
And I'm going to talk about Willow Creek. Okay. Willow Creek, a few years back, had
remembered at the time what.
Okay, it didn't go live. I'll have to restart everything.
When are we starting?
I'm going to start it now. Some error occurred, it said.
Okay, I'll turn off my mic.
I am so conservative.
Rationalize in my head. These are things I read.
And I'm going to talk about Willow Creek. Okay. Willow Creek, a few years back, had
remembered at the time when Will Rogers said, I don't belong to any organized religion. I'm a Baptist.
Yeah. I am so conservative. If he didn't jump to conclusions, he might not get any exercise. I am so conservative. And welcome to the Unknown Webcast. What am I doing here? I'm lost and dazed and confused, which happens a lot. This is a safety warning for new viewers who may not be aware that I really am so conservative I can't turn left even when I'm driving. It is also true that I am theologically conservative. I want to know and believe what is true, and I'm willing to challenge my beliefs. So, for those viewers who have a fear of hearing an idea which may lead to actually thinking and testing their beliefs, this is a trigger warning. This is not a safe space for you if you're easily offended by having your ideas challenged. This is November 10, 2020, and this is broadcast number 214. Joining us today on the Unknown Webcast is Alex Newman, senior editor of New American and the author of Crimes of the Educators, How Utopians Are Using Government Schools to Destroy America's Children. Boy, that's a long title. Our topic today is faith, education, and the elections. My name is Don Vino.
Your name. Finally, you got to that. I'm glad you finally got to that.
Exactly. Because the long title threw me off.
I've been waiting.
I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast, and our senior researcher, co-host, and maybe returning COVID former COVID-19 tracker is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie Baby.
Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm trees came out, saw their shadows, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsors for this edition of the Unknown Webcast include Where's the Outrage? The game where the woke shall inherit the earth, unless, of course, they're white males, and the guaranteed the most comfortable Bible you'll ever own. What's going on, Don? What's happening? There we go. Okay, go. The guaranteed the most comfortable Bible you'll ever own, my Bible. And if you really like this webcast or you're annoyed by it and would like to inflict it on somebody else to ensure your continued access, go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube. Now, Don, as you know, as I've said, today is a very special day, right?
Yes, you said that.
Yeah, I did. It's a very special day. So I have, we want to celebrate this specialness of the speciality of this day. And I have another little presentation. I don't know if you recognize this guy here that I'm about to show you as soon as I move my screens around. Come on, go. Would you please just go over there? Okay. So remember this guy? Recognize him?
Yeah, I think he just voted in Michigan.
No, he's dead. But he might have voted anyways. Today is Martin Luther's 537th birthday. On this day in 1483, November 10th, Martin Luther was born. He actually came into the world. And because of that, we have, I don't know if you've heard of his 95 Theses. Well, we have 13 Theses for Martin Luther's birthday. And here they are. Thesis 1, you say it's your birthday. Thesis 2, it's my birthday too. Yeah. Thesis 3, they say it's your birthday. Thesis 4, we're going to have a good time. 5, I'm glad it's your birthday. Happy birthday to you. Now, these three are all the same. Yes, we're going to a party. Yes, we're going to a party. Okay, I would like you to dance. Birthday. I would like take a cha-cha-cha-chance. Birthday. I would like you to dance. Birthday. Martin Luther's 537th birthday, the 13 theses that go along with that. Congratulations, Marty, for making it this far. And congratulations, Protestant Reformation, for somehow staying on track. We don't know how it happened. But
yeah, really. Or will it continue even? That's a big pressing question. Hello, Alex. Thank you for putting up with our nonsense. We thoroughly enjoy doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and in case you want to get a real taste of Luther, if you just go to the, just type in Luther Insulter, and you can go to this page, and it actually takes quotes right from Luther's works. You can see right there, this is from Luther's work, volume 46. Luther was really great at insults. And then you could say, insult me again. You find things well, that's a little bit long to read. Do we have any shorter ones? You are bungling magpie croaking loudly. So just remember that. When you feel the need to be insulted by a genuine reformer of the church, go to Luther Insulter. So.
All right. Well, now we're going to do something that hopefully won't insult Alex, or maybe it will. But it is his book, Crimes of the Educators, which I would recommend you consider purchasing and go.
I'm going right to Amazon now, putting it on
into our description, because then we'll get a little shekels from that.
Shekels.
Yeah, shekels. I like shekels.
I prefer denarii, but
well, I'll see how you are. Okay, Alex, it's good to have you again.
Thank you very much for having me, gentlemen. It's great to be with you.
On this auspicious occasion of Martin Luther's birthday, with his 13 theses, and with an election that is not finally declared yet.
It depends which network you're listening to. In fact, I can only think of one or two that haven't declared it, and they're the ones that.
I have declared a few things over the last few days, as many probably have, not having to do with the election itself, but rather its impact on me, which is not a good one. So, but our topic for today is faith, education, and elections. And I really thought Alex would be a good guy to kind of talk about this, because he has concerns about all three areas: elections, education. He's very involved in homeschooling and things like that, and faith. So I'm going to throw my first sort of question out there and see which one of you want to kind of grab a hold of it. And that is, how much do you believe elections influence education, and how does that interact with the outworking of the faith in a nation?
Go ahead, Alex.
Well, in theory, elections should have a pretty significant impact on the education system, at least the government-run education system. Unfortunately, that has not been the case. Trump has been the president of the United States for 4 years. And of course, the U.S. government has absolutely no constitutional authority to deal with education in the first place. But the reality is virtually every public school in America today takes its orders from the U.S. Department of Education. We've got the Common Core now in place, thanks to the Obama administration. And we do have not just a national system of education, but increasingly a globalized system of education, where the decisions of your local school board really are irrelevant. I mean, they're allowed to decide things like salary and, should the children wear uniforms and stuff like that. But on a substantive level, in terms of what is taught, what sort of worldview is taught, what sort of history is taught. It really is all decided outside of the scope of local school boards and even state school boards. These essentially have just become implementing machines for the decrees that come down from Washington, D.C. and even from the United Nations. And I think that's a big, even the idea that elections should influence education, I think is a little bit problematic. When I read the Bible, my Bible's pretty clear. I've tried everywhere to find even just an implied hint that Caesar ought to be directing the education, the upbringing, the discipleship of our children. And there's no way. You just cannot fit it into the text of Scripture. Every reference that you have to the upbringing, to the education, to the discipling, to all of these things having to do with children, the responsibility is always squarely on parents, maybe with a secondary role for the church. So I think probably one of the most significant mistakes that we made as a nation was allowing a bunch of anti-Christian totalitarians to convince us that the education of our children could be better handled by government than by parents and then the church.
You kind of get the impression from reading the Bible that parents were mainly the ones who were to teach their children, right? I mean, you have Deuteronomy. I mean, we don't have a lot of references to education and how it was supposed to be handled, but we do have some pretty clear instructions like Deuteronomy 6:7, you shall teach these things diligently to your children, shall talk to them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise. And then, you have the book of Proverbs, which talks a lot about listening to your parents' instructions. But, what you just said is, we have a lot of college-educated people, probably even in our audience, and some of them, if maybe they're stumbling upon this program, will think that you're just totally out of your mind. How can you possibly say that the government does not have a role in education? How can you possibly use the word unconstitutional when you talk about the federal role? How can you do that? How can
Well, I'm happy to take that. The Constitution is pretty clear. I think the most important thing people could do is just read it. There's all this ridiculous propaganda. The layman can't understand that.
I don't know if we've ever thought of that.
Right. Well, they want us to think that you have to be a trained lawyer and you got to stare decisis and all this nonsense gobbledygook that is supposed to intimidate us. Just read the darn thing, right? The Constitution is very clear. Most of the authorities that the federal government has are outlined in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which outlines the responsibilities, the areas in which Congress is allowed to legislate. And of course, we know the Constitution reserves all legislative powers to the U.S. Congress. And when you read Article 1, Section 8, you can read it upside down, just like your Bible, right? No matter how hard you read it, you won't find Caesar educating children. Same thing with your Constitution. No matter how hard you try to squeeze that in there, there is absolutely no legitimate way that you can stick education into the U.S. Constitution.
But that begs the question for many people, wait a minute, isn't it, how can you say what the government can't do?
Well, that was actually the purpose of the Constitution. The states came together and they said, hey, we're going to give up a few powers. And they actually wrote about this in the Federalist Papers, few and defined powers. So the states have the sovereignty, and we are willing to delegate a little bit of that sovereignty to a federal government that will do the following things. Post offices, a patent office, national defense, having a navy. There's a handful of things that are really the responsibility of the federal government. Those are powers that the states gave up. Not listed in there were powers over education. In fact, most of the states, would have been inconceivable that even the state government would be running education. It didn't even occur to them that we have to specifically prohibit education. First of all, because the Constitution was clear. These are the powers the feds have. If it's not listed here, they don't have that power. They actually went back and even made that more explicit, just so that, 250 years in the future, you couldn't have some lunatic saying, oh, well, it's not prohibited, so we're going to do it. They actually went back and they put in the 10th Amendment, where they said the powers not delegated to the United States or prohibited to thereof are hereby reserved to the states and the people. In other words, any powers that we didn't specifically delegate to the federal government are specifically prohibited. And, we have a mechanism to change that. If the totalitarians really believe that the federal government ought to control our education system, they can go to the people and say, hey, we want a constitutional amendment. Then the people can ask their representatives in Congress. Actually, there's two ways to amend the Constitution. So far, they haven't done that. So
got my copy here of the Constitution. I keep it right here. By the way, but wait a minute. I just read that 10th Amendment, and it says something about states' rights, and isn't that racist?
Oh, yeah, exactly. That argument. It's funny because I was just reading an interesting book yesterday on the airplane about Romans 13. And one of the really interesting examples they gave of contemporary, they were talking about the doctrine of the lesser magistrates later on in the book. It was written by my friend, a pastor in Oklahoma called Dan Fisher. Wonderful, wonderful man, theologian. And he talked about contemporary examples of the implementation of the doctrine of lesser magistrates, where lesser magistrates have not just the duty, or not just the right, but the duty to defy the higher magistrates if the higher magistrates are doing something evil, wicked, something that God has prohibited. And one of the examples they gave, I'm sitting in Wisconsin right now, which is where the headquarters of the New American Magazine is. They said, Wisconsin, the Congress had passed the Fugitive Slave Act, and this required state governments and even individual citizens and law enforcement officers and so on to kidnap people who had fled from slavery from the southern states and return them to their so-called owners in the southern states. Well, the state of Wisconsin said, nope, we're not going to do that. Sorry. Not only is that unconstitutional, it's ridiculous and it's immoral. Right. We're not going to conscript our people.
But it was the Compromise of 1850 that allowed California to come into the Union as a free state. So, it made things worse in the long run. But
so the point is that state rights are, actually have been used specifically to stop racism and to stop racist policies. Right. And it's interesting, South Carolina, and I'm not one of those people who believes that the reason the South seceded was just to keep their slaves. In fact, I think that's ridiculous. But one of the reasons South Carolina said in their Declaration of Secession, one of the reasons why they were seceding was because the northern states, in their view, were unconstitutionally nullifying all these, what they viewed to be constitutional laws, including the Fugitive Slave Act. They said, hey, if the northern states don't want to participate in this union, we're not going to participate either. We're out of here. And so, the irony is that the real racism was on the side of the federal supremacists who insisted that, every unconstitutional decree of the federal government must be unconditionally obeyed, which is ludicrous.
But to update the rhetoric a little bit, the first time I ever heard of a problem with the phrase states' rights was in the 80s. And Jesse Jackson came on television and denounced the Reagan administration for using the phrase because it was connected with what the South was doing to try to prevent civil rights in the 50s and 60s. They were claiming that things like civil rights bills, civil rights acts, which, by the way, the Republicans passed 3 of them in the 50s before the Democrats, and one in 1960 when Eisenhower was still president, before the famous 1964 one, which the Democrats were trying to filibuster, by the way. So states' rights had become rhetorically associated with segregation. And so Jesse, but the thing, like you said earlier, just read the document, just read what it actually says. It really doesn't matter how the phrase is used rhetorically. It matters what the phrase means in our Constitution. So people like George Wallace and others were using it to denounce northern moves to dismantle segregation. It had become tarred with the brush of segregationism, but it is an important cornerstone to the checks and balances system, the very careful checks and balances system that the founders created, not only between the 3 branches of federal government, but between the states and the federal and the central federal government. And when I was a kid growing up, we heard a lot about balance of powers between the 3 branches. We didn't hear a lot about the balance between the states and Washington. That wasn't stressed to us so much. And I think the reason is because education was becoming liberalized. They really didn't want us to think about that too much.
Well, right. Now we have talked about with Alex and with others in past webcasts, kind of the impact of John Dewey on shaping public school as we currently have it. And Pastor Stephen Broden on Gramsci's March to the Institutions. How does that play with government and education? Or do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I think the reason our nation is in the trouble it's in is almost exclusively due to this mistake that we made of handing our children over to the government. I think Donald Trump put it very well in his 4th of July speech at Mount Rushmore. He said the reason for the mayhem in our streets is that our children are being indoctrinated in government schools to hate their own country. He was exactly right. That is why we have mayhem in our streets. That is why Americans have turned away from the Bible. That is why our families are collapsing. That is why drug use is exploding. That is why gangsters are shooting each other in the streets. That is why we have an illiteracy crisis like we have never had before in the history of this country. That is why the moral fabric of this nation is disintegrating. That is why the majority of my generation, millennials, now officially say they are not Christian. First generation in American history where we have a majority non-Christian generation. And it's only going to get worse, right? As long as we continue to allow anti-Christian totalitarians to brainwash our children with our tax dollars, we're going to continue struggling to defend our freedom in elections. And that's what they're counting on. Fortunately, right now, most young people don't vote, which is, a good thing, because if they were voting, we would probably end up like Venezuela or Cuba much quicker than we would otherwise. But that's the direction we're going. And, it was a long march through the institutions. John Dewey wrote about, we cover this all very clearly in the book, Crimes of the Educators. John Dewey was a socialist. He went to the Soviet Union for inspiration on the education system and other matters, and he loved it. I mean, he came back and he filed all these articles with the New Republic about how great the Soviet system was. He loved that the schools were instilling what he called a collectivistic mentality in the children. But he knew
we don't have anybody. It's a good thing we don't have anybody nowadays who actually went to the Soviet Union and loved it.
Yeah.
Like maybe in Congress, it's really a good thing.
Like Bernie Sanders, Bolshevik Bernie.
Right. I'm sorry, I forgot. Okay, one exception.
Right. Unbelievable times, but really, I think the reason why we're in this situation is because of the government education system. This was a deliberate program. John Dewey, to his credit, he was a lot of things. He was anti-Christian. He was one of the co-authors of the first Humanist Manifesto, where they say very clearly the first tenet: we believe the universe is self-existing and not created. Right. In other words, there is no God. That's the very first part of their thing. But to his credit, he was honest. He wanted to use the educational system to totally reform, restructure, fundamentally transform, to quote a more modern iteration of the ideology, the United States of America. And they have been wildly successful.
I was a certified teacher, middle school teacher.
And now you're just certifiable. So.
After teaching middle school, you would be too. But anyways, for 8 years. And I was certified in English as well as social sciences. And I also taught Bible with my master's degree in Christian schools. I'm kind of glad that I wanted to get into public schools. That was my goal, but it didn't work out. It ended up giving me experiences that were very interesting, including one where I was in a parent-teacher conference. And this mother came to me. She had transferred her daughter from a local middle school, a local, regular public school, government school, middle school, to our school. She was kind of flailing around. She was actually making A's though in English there. She was now making high C's in our school, low B's. And a lot of times you brace yourself for those meetings because you think the mother's going to be angry at you. And she came and she had tears in her eyes, and she said, "Thank you for teaching my daughter vocabulary." I go, "Really?" We had our vocabulary curriculum required the kids to learn 20 words a week. And I couldn't believe, I said, "They didn't teach any vocabulary at the school she came from?" "No." And she says, "That's why my daughter is struggling now. I believe she'll catch up. I'm confident she can handle it." But she was crying. She had tears coming down her. And I said, "Well, don't thank me. I didn't pick the curriculum." But I'm really glad to hear that. I'm very sad to hear that the kids coming out of the middle school up the street are basically, like you said, functionally illiterate. How are they gonna understand what they're reading?
Right. Well, and one of the things that we're all kind of having to watch, the three of us, we're different ages. I'm the old guy in the group here. But one of the things that I marvel at currently is we have this new group of youth who have youthful exuberance, idealism, and are asking the big question about outrage. I mean, what is going on around here? And we have a sponsor.
Well, yeah, but the first questions they usually ask, we'll ask it anyways. Have those boring family dinners become unbearably tedious? Do you wonder when someone will invent a board game that gives your life a real purpose? Do you want to be part of something bigger than yourself while remaining the center of your universe? Well, then we have just what you're looking for. Where's the Outrage? The game where the woke shall inherit the earth, unless, of course, they're white males. And Where's the Outrage? There are no unfair inequality promoting dice. The rules for taking turns are simple. Each player gets points for being in an oppressed group, and then turns are taken in the order of the most points. The next thing you do is you choose a bankroller, also known as the game's George Soros. The George Soros distributes the game cards, and now you're ready to play. Each player chooses a game piece and places it in the forward space. So we have here Briannold, who is an African-American, Native American, non-binary, transgender, former female, whose pronouns are Marx, Engels, and Lenin. And Briannold gets the first move. Briannold chooses to move Briannold's, I'm not even going to try the pronoun, Briannold's game piece to the Christian-owned bakery, where Briannold immediately grabs a free lawyer's card and occupies the space. Now Briannold is free to make another move because there really are no rules about this. And when Briannold comes to the free speech zone, Briannold just blows off those fascist white supremacists with their stupid free speech by grabbing an entitlement card. And the fun is just beginning. Where's the Outrage? The game where the woke shall inherit the earth, unless, of course, they're white males. So, I mean, it's okay for white males to be woke. They just can't inherit the earth.
Can't inherit the earth. So here's why I think this timing on this particular one is important. Because as we're talking about public school, and one of the things that we're seeing this year, Donald Trump a month ago came out and said, y'all are teaching this critical race theory. He didn't use y'all, but I'll use it in the executive branch, and that's going to stop like today. However, we do have public schools that are implementing that in grade school level. So they'd be learning this stuff there. Is that another reason why we should really seriously consider whether or not government schools are the best idea?
I mean, it's one among a gazillion. I actually like what Voddie Baucham said. He's one of my favorite pastors and theologians over in Zambia right now. But he said, if you send your children to public school, you're sinning. And not just because they're going to brainwash them with, race mongering and critical race theory and all that. I mean, that'll turn your child's brain to mush real quick. You want your children to hate you and hate everything you stand for and take drugs and, rebel. Yeah, send them there. Get them trained up with critical race theory. But that's just, it's scratching the surface of the problem. It's like one of the molecules on the top of the iceberg. Critical race theory is just the latest iteration of the Marxist propaganda. But, at this point, I don't understand how a professing Christian can say, yes, I'm going to hand my children over to a government school for education. I just don't see how one can do it. And I don't say that in a condescending way. On many, many things, God gives us liberty, right? It's if you don't feel convicted by it, maybe you don't need to worry about it. But on the issue of educating your children, you mentioned Deuteronomy. It's a great one, right? You're supposed to be educating your children when they wake up in the morning, when you're eating, when you're walking by the way, when you're putting them to sleep. Notice there isn't any whenever they're not with Caesar, right? It's all the time you are supposed to be handling the education of your children. It's not something that you can delegate to Caesar.
Well, but isn't it possible for the same thing to happen? I mean, are you also saying that maybe Christians should just homeschool, or are you saying? I
think that's the ideal, but I mean, a Christian school is certainly acceptable.
Because people, I was in a Christian school for 8 years, and I'm telling you, they're doing the same thing. Parents are doing the same thing with Christian schools that they do with public schools. They're turning their kid over to the educators. Now, not all of them. Some of them are very conscientious and make sure that their kids, they look in on what their kids are learning, and if they have a problem with it, they come and tell us. But that's a very small minority.
Yep.
You know.
We did an article on this in our special report on rescuing our children in our second edition that we did, because we realized that was a big gaping hole. A lot of parents just think, well, I work also at a private Christian school. It's the Freedom Project Academy. I teach advanced economics there to high school seniors. But there are a lot of Christian schools where it's very difficult to tell the difference between the Christian school and the world's schools. I mean, they're even in some cases using the same textbooks. They're like, hey, we're saving money by using government school textbooks. Excuse me, you're also teaching the children a bunch of lies, that they came from slime that somehow turned into a monkey, and that America is just evil 100% through and through. I mean, this stuff has consequences. When you train up a child with this sort of worldview, whether there's a prayer at the morning session at the chapel or not, you're going to get the same outcome. You're going to get children who hate their family, who hate God, who reject the authority of the Bible, and so on. So, God has given parents a very serious responsibility, and they need to take that seriously. And if you send your child to a Christian school, you have an obligation to make sure that Christian school is doing the things that they should be doing. And unfortunately, many are not. So,
well, the other thing, though, is, okay, I don't know I don't have my finger on the pulse nationally of what's going on with Christian schools, but I can tell you that the base here in Southwest Florida is shrinking. And it started doing that even before the so-called Great Recession hit. And the reason is because Southwest Florida in particular went into its own local recession beginning in 2006 and 2007. We had a housing bubble and it burst. And so we were growing at a rate of 5% a year. We were like one of the fastest, maybe the fastest growing metropolitan areas in the country. We started shrinking at the same rate. And we started losing parents because they were being transferred out or moving out for economic reasons. So, but even after even after that went away, even after the so-called Great Recession went away, the school I taught at for 6 years closed. And I after those 6 years, I moved on to another school. I was laid off for economic reasons and went to another school. And then after I taught at the other school for a couple of years, the school I came from closed down. That's what I mean by our base. Our number of classrooms and seats to put students into is shrinking in this part of the country. What's going on nationwide? Because if it keeps shrinking, it gets more expensive. You have waiting lists. You can't get your kid into a Christian school. Is that happening across the country, or how's it going?
Yeah, there's a few things going on there. And I think one of the issues that's affected Florida and has affected a lot of other states is the emergence of charter schools.
Yeah,
I know a lot of conservatives like charter schools, and I've been trying to sound the alarm on this for a long time. When you are a charter school in the United States of America, you are not allowed to teach the Bible as truth. In fact, you have to follow virtually all of the government's regulations on the things that matter. Yeah, you might get a little bit more freedom in hiring and uniforms and administration and grading and things like that. But on the things that matter, you're required to follow the government's decrees. The same is true in Florida. Right? And there's some good charter schools in Florida. There's actually a great one that I know of in Southwest Florida, the Mason. It's a phenomenal school from the perspective
what was it called?
Mason Classical Academy.
Okay.
A great school, and I saw their scores, and they were at the top 1% of the state. And I knew right away what was going on. They were teaching children how to read using phonics in defiance of Common Core. But they're supposed to be following the Common Core. And there's not any Bible allowed. You can't teach the children that, God created them because, separation of church and state. And what happens is parents see a charter school that's doing good, or better than typical government indoctrination center posing as a school, and they say, hey, why am I going to pay $5,000 or $10,000 a year to put my children in a Christian school when I can get a semi-decent education at a charter school? And so what happens, the Christian schools then are lose enough students where their margin goes away, they can't operate anymore, and then we don't have a Christian school. So similar things are happening across the country in states where charter schools are expanding. This happened massively in Louisiana. In fact, I spent some time with a Lutheran pastor there. His church had a school attached and had for time immemorial. Charter school opened up nearby. Boom, next year the Lutheran school had to shut down. So this is happening everywhere. But it's not a totally grim picture. Just in the last 6 months, to give you some perspective, thank you, COVID shutdown, the homeschool population in the United States has more than doubled.
Yeah.
Gallup did a survey. In 2019, 5% of American families with school-aged children were homeschooling. By 2020, by August 2020, 10% of American families with school-aged children were homeschooling. And because homeschool families tend to be larger, significantly more than 10% of American children now are being homeschooled. And that's real homeschooling, not the kind where the government sends you a laptop and pumps the propaganda into your house. So, that's incredibly encouraging. But you're right. Christian schools are under tremendous pressure because it's hard to compete with free. First of all, anybody who's ever been in business trying to compete against something the government's giving out for free can tell you it's hard to compete with free. And it's also hard to compete with these charter schools that are popping up everywhere. So I think that's something that we really need to be sounding the alarm about. Well, and I think Christian parents need to recognize, a secular charter school is not an adequate alternative to providing your children with a true Christian education.
I would say there's another hidden thing that's sneaking up on us, and that is that one of the motives for getting the most excellent education you could get for your child was to get him into some of the best colleges you could get him into. Well, they've been eroding entrance requirements for decades now. And in more recent years, they've been eroding graduation requirements. So now, when you are getting this excellent education for your kids, a lot of times you find your kid is smarter in some ways than some of the graduates coming out of the schools you're trying to get him into or her into. It's really become, we have a huge, the education crisis in our country is much bigger than a K through 12 problem, as you know, I'm sure. Yeah. We are producing a phenomenally ignorant generation of young people, phenomenally.
And this is by design.
It's absolutely incredible the kind of ignorance I run into among 20-somethings. Absolutely incredible.
It is.
So I want to ask you just a slightly different question, because some have been pointing out that under the current administration, which may or may not continue, we still don't know how it's going to shake out for sure, there was not just the issue of abortion, which is obviously a concern of ours, but there are other issues. For example, they were saying, what about school choice? Now, you have some thoughts on school choice. I think pro and con. The cons maybe outweigh the pros on that. What is that?
Yeah, I do. And thank you for the opportunity to speak on this. And, I know that many of my conservative friends, my libertarian friends, my Christian friends have nothing but the best of intentions in advocating for what's come to be known as school choice. And I don't suspect the Trump administration's motivations at all, but I think they're very wrong. I think the whole school choice agenda is really a Trojan horse. And one of the reasons I know this to be true is because I've seen it happen in multiple other jurisdictions. So I spent most of the last decade living in Sweden, the People's Republic of Sweden. And, at least until COVID came along, they were usually wrong about everything when it comes to government policy. Then COVID came and they did nothing. And obviously they're doing better than anybody else. And they didn't shred their economy in the process. But, leaving that aside, what happens is oftentimes the establishment tries out their crazy policies in Sweden before importing them to California. That's true. See how they work. Homosexual marriage, the whole transgender mania. They try it all in Sweden first. They see how people respond. Then they take it to California. Well, they did the same thing with school choice. They said, hey, isn't it unfair that, Christian parents can't send their children to Christian schools and blah, blah, blah. We should just have the tax money follow the child. And they did. And that was nice until 2011. They passed the education reform bill. They banned homeschooling. And they said that any school, including all private schools, Christian schools, et cetera, that were taking government money must teach the government curriculum, must not teach children the Bible, must not allow prayer during school hours. And so, you get the point. There are now no more Christian schools in Sweden in the true sense. There's some that are Christian in name only, but they can't teach the Bible. They can't teach the truth of God's word. They can't teach, that there's men and women, that God created them male and female. So, you get the point, right? What happens is, and this is going to happen in the United States, they're already moving in for the kill shot in the states where they already have school choice, my state, Florida being one of them. They say, well, hey, all this tax money is going to all these private schools. according to the Supreme Court, that means they're subject to government regulation. We can't have Christian schools discriminating against homosexuals and transgenders. What do you mean you can't hire a man wearing a dress to teach a kindergarten class in a Christian school? That's discrimination, and you're getting government money. You're not allowed to discriminate. So that's coming, folks. That is going to be the way they're going to bring our Christian schools under control, and we, I think, have got to resist that at all costs.
Here's a little ditty for you. We have a Muslim population in this country. When Don, in Lombard, there was right around the corner from where I lived before I moved down here, there was a school, a Muslim school.
Right.
Right there. Was it Madison Street? Madison near Edison?
Right. Yep. Right by the White Hunt Pantry where I went to take coffee every morning.
That school building was actually my wife's kindergarten building and early grade school before, they built a different one. So my wife went to school there. In any case, the Muslim population isn't nearly as big down here in Southwest Florida, but when our K through 8 school was still open, a Muslim family came and tried to put their kid into our school. And we were just in the process of starting to accommodate that kind of a thing where you didn't necessarily have to make a profession of faith. And our principal said, if your child comes here, we're going to teach the Christian faith. And the Muslim said, okay. and we just want you to know that they're going to hear things that, you might find offensive if you were to hear them anywhere else. And said, that's fine. I just want my kid here. Now, it turned out we were still in the process of changing our entrance requirements, so it didn't happen in time for that child to enroll. But I found that amazing that they are so determined to make sure their kids get a proper education. All this concern about offending, they were able to put that to the side. I mean, some of the truths of the Christian faith are so offensive to Muslims that they'll, if you're in Afghanistan or Pakistan, they'll cut your head off on the street, right? But in this country, they're able to, this family in particular was able to lay that to the side to make sure their child got the best education possible. And yet much of these reactionary policies that come out of places like Sweden are, the premise is, we don't want to offend people. Well, right. I don't think people are offended if their kids get a good education.
One of my concerns now, like I said, I'm an old guy. My kids are grown. My grandkids are nearly all grown. So they're kind of getting into a safer space in a sense. But I'm concerned about the kids that are coming up because politics impacts education. There's no way around it. Why? Because certain government ideas, let's say, or parties or groups feel it is their not only prerogative but responsibility to cause everyone else to believe certain things. I think that's probably the way to put it. The idea of limited government resides in one political group predominantly. The idea of social guidance and care resides in another group. So you really can't have the opportunity to make your own decisions. We know way better what's better for you than you ever would. In that vein, then, it impacts faith. And my reasoning follows this way. If you are in a public school, for example, today, you will be subjected to critical race theory. I don't think there's any way around that. You will be told that the United States of America began in 1619 with the advent of slavery, which is untrue. How is that going to impact not only the kids growing up learning that and their political alliances and view of America, but how is that going to impact their faith?
Yeah, the public schools are designed to destroy the faith of the children. It's plain and simple. And I think for the Christian, this, even without all the 1619 Project lies, and I mean, it's all lies. Even the fact checker for the New York Times said, you can't publish this. This is ridiculous. And they published it anyway. That's how bad it was. But leaving all that aside, I mean, they're going to turn your child into a racist, a socialist, a communist who hates America. You know, the premise of the 1619 Project was spelled out very clearly. Racism, white supremacy, oppression, and evil are in the DNA of America. In other words, it's unchangeable. You can't have a civil war. You can't change policy. You can't do any kind of thing to get that DNA out. The only possible remedy is to murder the patient, and maybe hopefully something new will grow up there. That is ultimately the objective of the people pushing the 1619 Project. It is in all the public schools. The goal is to destroy the biblical foundations that this nation was founded on using lies, because of course if they taught the truth, the children would love America. But zooming out now, the big picture, no Christian, I think, can in good conscience send their child to a public school. What does the Bible say about what an education looks like? Just go to Proverbs, right? There's so many passages in Scripture talking about this, but there's two that are really basic. Proverbs 1:7 and Proverbs 9:10. The Bible tells us that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The Bible tells us that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Okay, and I think everybody can agree that an education should involve wisdom and knowledge. Well, the Bible tells us the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom and the beginning of knowledge. It's against the law to try to instill in the children the fear of the Lord. In fact, it's against the law to even talk about the Lord in most contexts. In 1962, U.S. Supreme Court ruled you couldn't have prayer in school, so you can't thank God, much less fear him. In 1963, they kicked the Bible out of school. Total perversion of the Constitution, but they've made it very clear. You cannot teach children the fear of the Lord. You can't even talk to the children about the Lord. So any Christian, knowing that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of the wisdom and the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, and then they still send their children to get an education from an institution that not only can't teach the fear of the Lord, can't even talk about the Lord, where everything is designed to make you reject even the existence of God, right? They for 12 years, they're teaching the kids that they came from slime that turned into a monkey, right? They don't do that because they think it's true. They don't do that because they think it's, I mean, certainly the teachers do, but the powers that be, the satanic forces, the diabolical forces trying to destroy our children, they know very well that the Bible is true, but they want lies taught to the children for the purpose of destroying their faith. And the data is now clear. I'm on the advisory board for the Nehemiah Institute, and they've been studying worldview of children for decades. And what they have found is that now something like 80% of children who go through 12 years of government brainwashing, even when they come from good Christian homes with two Christian parents who stay married, 80% of them are going to leave the faith and they're going to leave the church. So parents, that's like playing Russian roulette, but with 5 rounds in 5 out of the 6 cylinders. Okay, right. You would be an absolute fool to take those kinds of odds.
So here's the problem, though, that we have is because they at least want to give sort of lip service to the Bible, they just don't like what the Bible says. Now, we have a sponsor who's kind of solved that problem.
Yeah, I think they have come up with the solution, because we all know that awkward feeling when someone in a Bible study says, "I wish the Bible didn't have all those verses about hell," or when you're having a couple's devotion and your spouse says, "I'm just not comfortable with verses that teach a traditional view of marriage," or when you're sitting in church and you're thinking, "Why do all the Bibles I read always have to agree with what my conservative pastors are teaching?" Well, that's why we're introducing My Bible. It's guaranteed the most comfortable Bible you'll ever own. We've spent literally minutes creating a way you can have the Bible that's perfect for you. You used to have to go down some dark back alley to get a Bible like this, but not anymore. Just write down all the places where you want your Bible to make your Bible more comfortable for you, and then email them to us or enter them into our handy online form, and the results speak for themselves. Yolanda from Portland says, "Now that I have my Bible, I never worried that my white male pastor's sermons might actually be right." Ben from seminary says, "My Bible gave me the confidence I needed to drop out of my Hebrew and Greek classes." Renee from Madison says, "Every single one of my anti-capitalist, anti-police, and anti-social protest chants now comes from my Bible." And Buck50 from Brooklyn said, "Since I got my Bible, I have no trouble basing my violent and misogynistic lyrics on scripture." So when someone throws an uncomfortable verse at you, you can say, "That's not in my Bible." So got to get that thing right away. Just fill out the handy online form.
The online form, exactly. And there you go. Doesn't that solve the problem for the government so they could allow the Bible in there?
Well,
they just have to fix it.
You know,
Make
it sounds like such a joke, but let me give you guys something that happened in Sweden. And, you know, the Bible also tells you what happens when you don't have knowledge. We know the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The Bible tells you in Hosea 4:6, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. So we know where this goes once we have a whole generation with no knowledge, and that's where we're headed. But in Sweden, the regime decided to investigate the Bible for hate speech violations. And the Justice Ombudsman there determined that, oh, wow, actually, yes, the Bible is a violation of our hate speech codes. Now, he said it's not practical for us to ban it right now. You know, other countries might look at us and say, wow, you look a lot like North Korea. So they said, hey, but there is a way we can solve this. We can take out or change the language in these problematic verbs. I am not kidding. Okay, that's Sweden. Okay, Sweden is huge. I used to say they were 30 or 40 years ahead of us. Now I've revised my estimates. Now I say they're probably 15 to 20 years ahead of us. But anybody who thinks that kind of crazy idea is not coming to America has not been paying attention. You know, we still have the First Amendment.
It's going to come through the Bible publishers.
It's already happening. They've already got an LGBT Bible and a Queen James Bible. And, you know, this is absolute atrocity taking place here. And yet, you know, there's a lot of people who are much more comfortable reading a fake Bible. And a lot of the cults do the same thing. They create their own fake version of the Bible that removes all the verses that show their theology and their doctrine is wrong. And, hey, that's a lot easier than dealing with actually God's word. So
those cretins, you know, they're such... You know,
they're always liars.
They're always liars. They're evil beasts, lazy gluttons.
I've heard that somewhere before.
Yeah, we can't have. I mean, we can't make their. Well, anyways. So, yeah, that is really ominous to think that. You know, I don't see the government personally getting involved in our country with publishing such Bibles, but I can easily see Zondervan doing it. I can easily see.
I can easily see Zondervan doing it for sure.
Yeah, you said earlier that you know, I just want to underscore something you said when you talked about the problem with school choice and the government. Well, in Sweden, the money follows the student, right? That sounds so good, but it gets back to what J. Gresham Machen said in the 1920s, wasn't it, when he testified before Congress? And he says, yeah, they were talking about creating a Department of Education in the 1920s. They were talking about, you know, using federal funds to promote, you know, better education in the states. And Machen says, well, yeah, it all sounds really nice and good and everything until you realize that the federal government never gives money without setting conditions. It never gives money without attaching strings to it. And that was his concern. And 50 years later, Jimmy Carter ignores all those concerns and creates the Department of Education. And now, basically, money is the way money is the way the government establishes control to get around the 10th Amendment of the Constitution.
Right.
That's why our school doesn't accept a penny of government money and never will. Freedom Project Academy. And that's why homeschoolers are so resistant. You know, the HSLDA, they've got hundreds of thousands of families that are members, including us. And they are one of the real heavyweights in the political arena. And they've always said, no government money for homeschoolers. It's not because we enjoy, I literally pay more in taxes for other people's children to be brainwashed than I pay to educate my own lots of children. Okay. Can you imagine that? I pay more money to brainwash other people's kids against my will than I pay to give my children a world-class education. That is sick. And it bothers me to no end. But if the government came to me and said, hey, we're going to give you money. You're doing such a great service by educating your own kids. You're reducing the burden on taxpayers. We're just going to give you a check for $5,000. Here, go do what you want with it. I would say, no, thank you very much. I'll pass. Yeah. Why? Because as soon as they've got the money flowing, they will make you dependent. And, rather than strings attached, I call it, they'll get their claws in you. And it will only be a very short while afterward. They'll say, oh, well, you're taking government money. I mean, we can't give you public money without accountability. What if you're teaching your kids that the Bible is true? What if you're teaching them that God really flooded the world and that Noah went on a boat? I mean, that's crazy. You can't teach your kids that, right? That's what's coming, folks. Well, I'm telling you. Mark my words.
Oh, it's already here.
It is here.
I mean, in a way, it's like I'm going to sound like a real right-wing nut now, and I'm going to say this is one of the best arguments for repealing the amendment that allows federal income tax.
Absolutely.
You know,
All
it's
right, I want to do two things for Alex, so I don't forget to do them. And if you're available, we'd like to run about 10 minutes over, if that's okay.
Unfortunately, I can't, gentlemen. I've got another
Okay.
appointment that starts as soon as we finish here, literally.
Okay.
So.
then we,
All right.
then we must
Then-
end on
then-
time.
then-
This is a
Then we
first.
must end. This
It's a
may be
first.
a first.
This
But I
never
do want to.
happened
I do want to. I do want to point this out again so that people can get it. Alex's book, "Crimes of the Educators." You can go to a link in our description. You can go and purchase that. Secondly, tell us about the New American so people know what that is in case they want to subscribe.
Yeah, thank you, Don. So the New American, I'm the senior editor there, just recently got that title. In my opinion, it is the most important and reliable magazine, not just in the United States, but in the world. That's why I write for it. I was in journalism school at the University of Florida, despairing. At the time, I was writing for a newspaper owned by the New York Slimes and another local paper. I thought, I can't do this. You know, I'm writing fair and balanced stories, and they're taking out all the quotes from someone who's mildly conservative and, you know, just keeping all the liberal propaganda. That's not right. So the New American Magazine is a great publication out there. It's operated by the John Birch Society, which is named after a Baptist missionary who was murdered by Chinese communists. People who are maybe over 40 or 50 have probably heard of it, probably in a negative context. The fake media did to the Birch Society the same thing that they did to Donald Trump more recently, but that was before the internet. But it's a phenomenal publication. You can subscribe online to the daily headlines for free, so we'll send you those for free. Or you can subscribe to or you can subscribe to the print magazine. You'll get 2 copies delivered to you every month, and it's a phenomenal magazine. That's why I write for it. I write for a lot of different clients, but the New American is just absolutely top of the line. I highly encourage people to go take a look.
Site? Did I get the right one here?
Yes, that's it right there. The New American.
Don't want to put some publications have names that are very close. So if you want to access it online, it's thenewamerican.com.
That's right.
The word "the" in there. Okay.
Yep.
All right, and then one more thing. If people are interested in considering home education and they haven't done it before and feel like I'm overwhelmed, I don't even know where to begin, and is this something my family can do? Do you have recommendations on who they should contact for step one to say, can I do this, or do I have to quit my job and live in a cave somewhere?
Yeah, well, one of the other hats that I wear, I'm the executive director of Public School Exit. Our mission in life, the reason we exist, is to help facilitate a mass exodus of families and children from Caesar's indoctrination centers into the safe sanctuary of homeschooling and Christian schools. You can visit us, publicschoolexit.com. That's publicschoolexit.com. You'll find everything you could imagine there. You'll find links to all the laws in your state. You'll find reasons why you need to do it. You'll find options for curricula. We're partnering with Christian schools all over America. If you don't feel like you can do homeschooling, we've even got a scholarship fund now.
Right.
Where
that's what I was going to ask you about. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, you know, I tell people, usually if you say you can't afford homeschooling, you're not telling the truth. We live in the richest society in the richest time period in all of human history. If our goat herding ancestors 3,000 years ago could homeschool their children, we can homeschool our children too. And I tell you know, I would live in a cardboard box before I would send my children to a government indoctrination.
When you're talking about homeschooling,
yes.
I'm thinking more about sending your kid to a Christian school.
Well, we work on both of those.
Okay.
So we've got a scholarship fund, and I tell you, we only take the neediest people. So single mom, you know, 5 kids, deadbeat husband ran off, and you know, he's working 2 jobs. If you have a summer home in Colorado, don't even contact us about your you know, desire for a scholarship. It's not going to happen. We don't have that kind of money. But when there is an obstacle, a legitimate obstacle to a family getting out, we want to help. So we're working with Christian schools. We're trying to set up a system now with different Christian schools across the country where we'll put up a third, the school will put up a third, and the family will put up a third. At the Freedom Project Academy, where I teach, we also have a scholarship program. And that's one of many, many schools out there. So there are options. And I tell people, where there's a will, there's a way. And, you know, if your children aren't at the very top of your priority list in terms of getting them a good God-centered education, you know, I'm not going to question your faith, but I think you really need to go back and examine your Bible, and you need to be in prayer about this because it's so clear. But go to publicschoolexit.com. Homeschool Legal Defense Association is another excellent resource for information. And there's a lot, you know, if people want ideas for curriculum and stuff, there's great resources out there. But be careful, you know, do your due diligence. You wouldn't just trust some random person to come into your house and teach your children. So don't just trust some random person with a curriculum or even a Christian school. Make sure you're following up. Make sure you're asking the right questions. Make sure you're looking for what you need to look for.
All right, I have another question. Penjamin asks, are you on Twitter?
I am. It's Alex Newman _JOU. And then my other account is Liberty Sent, LIBERTYSENT. That's for Liberty Sentinel. And then the New American is on Twitter as well. Public School Exit is not on Twitter yet, but hopefully it will be in the not too distant future. We are on Facebook. We are on some of those other ones too. So
at Alex Newman _JOU.
Yep, for journalism. Yep.
Sure. Okay. Well, we don't want to keep you late, but we'd like to
walk us out of here, if you will.
Through our end credits, so you don't have to leave early. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our culinary services are provided by Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D. Opposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our Liberal Denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for the Hindenburg disaster, for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, is OD Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yolik Pulling. Technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham & Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Giovanna Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is wiretapping, and original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never, ever.
That's why we have the Dewey, Cheatham & Howe firm.
That's right.
Okay.
All right, Alex, I really thank you for being with us. And Ron, say goodbye, Ron.
Goodbye, Ron.
Thank you, gentlemen.